Jacob stood at the edge of the Canaan fields, his eyes sweeping across the 12 men who stood before him. They were workers of the earth, men of the herd, their faces weathered by the heat. Jacob broke the silence, calling the youngest to his side. He pulled a bundle from his side, unfolding a heavy fabric woven with deep crimson, royal blue, and gold threads. He draped it over Joseph's shoulders, the weight of the material settling against the boy. Around them, the air went still. The other brothers did not move. They watched the fabric flutter in the light, their hands slowly balling into tight fists at their sides. A collective, rhythmic breathing slowed as they stared at the gift. One brother shifted his weight, his jaw working as he tracked the way the gold threads caught the sun. Another looked at the ground, his knuckles white, his gaze fixed on the dust. No words were exchanged, but the distance between the brothers and the boy widened with every passing second. Joseph stood unaware of the tension, his gaze fixed on his father, while his brothers stood rooted in the dirt, the silence between them turning heavy, sharp, and dangerous. The hierarchy of the family had shifted, and the resentment in their eyes was already hardening into a resolve that would soon tear everything apart. Joseph walked into the pasture, the fabric catching the wind like a signal fire. From the ridge, the brothers watched him approach. One hissed, "Here comes the dreamer," and gripped a heavy wooden staff. They swarmed before he could speak. They tore the garment from his back, pinning him to the earth, and dragged him to the jagged, dry well. They shoved him into the suffocating dark, his cries swallowed by the deep, hollow stone. Moments later, a caravan appeared. The brothers hauled him up, counted 20 silver coins into their palms, and watched as he was led away in chains. They slaughtered a goat, soaked the fabric in the steaming blood, and carried it back to the camp. They dropped the wet, stained material at the feet of their father. Jacob snatched it up, pressing the damp, heavy threads to his face. He collapsed onto the dirt floor, the air leaving his lungs in a guttural, jagged cry that echoed across the empty fields. The deception was complete. The brothers stood in the doorway, their faces unreadable, watching the old man break beneath the weight of the ruin they had manufactured with their own hands. Joseph arrived in Egypt under a relentless white-hot sun, his wrists chafed raw by iron shackles. He was marched to the estate of Potiphar, an officer of the palace. The days blurred into weeks of relentless labor. He scrubbed floors until his palms were split and organized endless ledgers until his eyes burned. Yet, he did not falter. Within months, his diligence earned him the keys to the entire household. He managed the grain, the servants, and the accounts. The peace was shattered in a single night. A false accusation reached the master, and the guards dragged Joseph out, ignoring his protests. He was thrown into a royal dungeon, a place where light rarely touched the floor. He sat on the cold, damp stone for years, listening to the rhythmic drip of water against rock and the hollow groans of men who had lost hope. He lived in the silence of the forgotten, his only movement the slow shifting of his weight on the hard ground. When two of Pharaoh's servants were cast into the same cell, he listened to their visions of the future. He spoke, and his words proved true. The prison walls remained, but his mind became a bridge to the world he had left behind, waiting for the day the stone doors would finally open. Pharaoh paced the length of his throne room, the floor tiles cold beneath his feet. He stopped, his jaw tight, as the image of 7 withered stalks of grain consuming the healthy ones repeated in his mind. He saw the starving cattle, their ribs jutting like blades, devouring the fat ones in a frenzy of hunger. He demanded answers from his court, but the advisors stood in silence, their eyes fixed on the ground. The air in the palace grew heavy, thick with the scent of stagnant incense and rising panic. The king struck his scepter against the stone, a sharp, ringing sound that silenced the room. In the back of the chamber, a servant stepped forward, his head bowed, whispering of a man in the dungeon who could see through the veil of dreams. The order was given. Guards sprinted to the prison, the iron keys shrieking in the locks. They hauled Joseph from the darkness, his eyes squinting against the harsh, sudden light. They shaved his matted beard and scrubbed the grime from his skin, discarding his rags for a simple tunic. He was shoved forward, stumbling into the vast, gold-leafed hall. He stood tall, his shadow stretching toward the base of the throne, meeting the gaze of the king as the weight of an empire hung in the balance. Joseph stood steady, his voice cutting through the suffocating silence of the throne room. He spoke without tremor. 7 years of plenty will fill your granaries, followed by 7 years of famine so severe that the harvest will be as if it never existed. The room went still. Pharaoh leaned forward, his gaze locked on the man who had been a prisoner only moments before. The king's rings clicked against the arm of the throne as he stood. He did not look at his advisors. He looked at the solution. Pharaoh reached out, stripped the heavy gold signet ring from his own finger, and pressed the cold metal into Joseph's palm. The seal bit into his skin. "You are second only to me," the king commanded. The guards stepped back. The royal court bowed. Joseph stood alone on the polished marble, the weight of the ring marking the end of his chains. He looked out from the high balcony, his eyes scanning the horizon where the Nile flowed. The grain shipments began to move. The famine was coming, but he held the keys to the kingdom. The prisoner had vanished. In his place stood the man who would feed the world. The skies turned to bronze and the earth cracked under the heat. 10 men, ragged and starving, dragged their feet toward the palace gates. Their ribs pressed against their skin. Their eyes were sunken and hollow. They reached the inner courtyard and collapsed, pressing their foreheads against the cold marble floor before the governor. Joseph looked down at them from his dais. He saw the faces of the men who had once sold him for silver. He saw the dust of Canaan still clinging to their feet. He turned his back to them, stepping behind the heavy silk curtain to hide his shaking shoulders. The silence in the hall stretched until it felt brittle. He drew a sharp breath, steadied his hands, and stepped back into the light. He stood over them, looming tall as the brothers trembled in the dirt. He reached up, gripped the edge of his hood, and pulled it back. The brothers froze. They looked up, their faces draining of color as they recognized the boy they had left for dead in a pit. The air left the room. The men who had orchestrated his ruin now stared into the eyes of the man who held their lives in his hands. The brothers did not move. They knelt, eyes fixed on the floor, waiting for the order to be taken away. Joseph stepped down from the dais. The stone floor clicked under his sandals as he walked toward them. He stopped in front of the oldest brother, reached out, and pulled him upright. The brothers flinched, but Joseph gripped their shoulders and drew them into a tight embrace. The guards remained silent, watching the governor hold the men who had once been his executioners. "Do not be afraid," Joseph said, his voice quiet but clear. He pulled back, scanning their faces, seeing the years of guilt etched into their skin. "You intended to harm me, but God used it for good to save many lives." The brothers began to weep, the sound echoing off the high stone walls. Their pride shattered, replaced by the weight of mercy. Joseph turned away, motioning for the palace servants to bring bread and water. The man who was once thrown into a pit had become the hand that fed the world. He stood among them, no longer a slave or a prisoner, but a brother. The cycle of vengeance ended there, replaced by the grain that would sustain the future.